School uniform is something I get asked a lot about as an occupational therapist specialising in sensory integration. For a lot of the children that I see and assess, they have significant touch sensitivity. So touch receptors are in the skin all over your body, and if you are over responsive to touch, that means that you aren't being able to block out the normal level of touch input coming in. So typically in sensory integration, what happens is that sensory input comes in, your brain registers it, and it either decides whether it needs to get used to it, so that's habituate, so it can just kind of block out and screen out the input that it doesn't need to pay attention to, or whether it needs to sensitize and take action. So if you hear a fire bell go off, your brain is sensitized to that and knows that it needs to take action. If, however, it's your daily school bell, but it's the same kind of loud fire bell noise, your brain blocks that noise out if it realises that's the school bell, I don't need to pay attention. So that's how we habituate. That's typically what happens in normal sensory integration. What we have found for some autistic people is that they don't habituate to sensory input. So Green et al. In 2015 did a study using functional MRI. So this is scans to pick up brain activity. They scanned autistic teenagers and non-autistic teenagers' brains in response to noise and touch input. And what they could see on the brain scans was that autistic teenagers weren't habituating to that sensory input the way that non-autistic teenagers habituate. So that means they're not getting used to sensory input even if it's repeated. They showed that on the scans there were a lot more activity in the amygdala, which is one of the emotional processing centres of the brain, and the sensory cortices as well. So we can take from that autistic students in school generally will struggle more with noise and touch input. The important thing to remember is that it's also really individual. So we can't do a one-size-fits-all and find the perfect solution for all autistic students, unfortunately. Instead, it's more working out for each individual what needs to happen. So for lots of autistic people, they don't report difficulties with clothing. However, if you do have an autistic individual or any individual with any kind of sensory issue that is reporting difficulties with clothing, we need to have a think about how that is functionally impacting on them in school. So there was a nice study done by Howe and Stagg in 2016 looking at how sensory experiences affect autistic adolescents in the classroom. So they had 16 students in a mainstream school, and they found that noise sensitivity was the primary concern, and after that 75% of the pupils reported touch sensitivity as well. So 3 pupils reported that their touch sensitivity impacted on them in the way that they had reduced concentration in class. What came out of this was it was quite individual, and that also stress worsened it. So I think a pupil said that on good days they wouldn't be bothered by things, but on stressful days they would become more acutely aware of sensations on their body than they would on non-stressful days. So this then links to another study by Kiriyasu et al. In 2021, so very recent last year, and that was titled Clothes, Sensory Experiences and Autism, Is Wearing the Right Fabric Important? So they had 10 participants in university, all were autistic, and it was about their experiences of sensory experiences relating to clothing. So in terms of stress, that was a key thing that came out again. So someone said, I feel that this is something that always keeps changing because some days I can handle normal clothes, but then other days I just can't find any clothes to wear. And someone else said, I suppose it's a case of how I feel in the day, and sometimes I can cope with certain fabrics, but other times it can be overwhelming. So something that's coming out is that it's very individual, and it's also time dependent and stress dependent. So you might find that some students generally are coping very well, but all of a sudden are really struggling with wearing school uniform. And in those cases, it's worth finding out if there are any external stressors that can be reduced as well. So as well as supporting them with finding an alternative uniform that fits and works for both school and for the student, it's also worth thinking about, is there a stressor that we can help reduce to make life a bit more comfortable anyway? Individuals have different sensitivities on different parts of their body. So someone might be irritated by clothing around their neck, some people might be around their middle, some people might be more sensitive on their legs or on their feet. So again, it's just very individual. So you can't have we'll just have seamless socks rule, because some people might be bothered by socks and others might not, but they might be bothered by labels at the back of their neck. In terms of experiences, some nice quotes came out of this. So someone's described that the hem on the top of the sock can feel suffocating. Someone else said you can't focus, you can't concentrate. So it's impacting that concentration if then wearing clothes or fabrics that aren't comfortable for them. Someone described how that cycle made them feel more agitated, and as they moved around they would get more and more stressed, and then they wouldn't be able to think clearly. It's more about how it feels than how it looks, so that's a really important thing, thinking about the feel of it. That's the key part. So we're not thinking about fashion, we're not thinking about the students who just don't want to look a certain way. It's thinking about what feels right, what feels comfortable. Some people described it as ants or bugs crawling on your skin. So wearing something uncomfortable and that feeling of bugs crawling on your skin all day, if we had to do that and wear clothes that made us feel like that, we know it would be really difficult to function in those situations. Someone else said it's like lots of little needles picking into you. And again, another person said that they want to itch it and they couldn't cut themselves from scratching at their skin so hard. Someone else described it as the sensations physically sting their skin. In terms of coping strategies, people listed avoidance, so just not wearing the things that upset them or not using furniture that is upsetting to them, as well as it's just easier when you become an adult. So people said that you can then choose your own clothing, and that's true of all of us. We all choose clothing that fits what we need to do that day and also what we're comfortable in from a variety of perspectives. So I think it's important to bear in mind that the students that we're working with often have very little control over the clothes that they're allowed to wear, and actually giving some control over that can be really helpful. Some people said that wearing a base layer such as a t-shirt or long sleeves really helped them just to kind of cover up skin that was otherwise exposed to fabrics that they found irritating. So that obviously works better in winter when it's cooler anyway, but that might be something that could be considered as an allowance. And people had generally a preference for softer fabrics, and some reported that softer fabrics made them feel safer and more at ease. So in terms of functionally how this then impacts on school uniform policy, I think what we need to take from that is that there can't be a one-size-fits-all solution. It's more on an individual case-by-case basis, finding something that works for the student as well as helps them fit in with the rest of the school policy. So for example, it's something like smart black trainers is a good alternative. If you've got someone who's really struggling to wear smart shoes because they're quite stiff and uncomfortable, finding a comfy pair of trainers will just allow them to be able to learn and pay attention to what they need to do, and it doesn't stand out from anyone else. So being able to be responsive throughout the year, so if someone comes and starts reporting difficulties with wearing uniform that they haven't been before, it's not thinking that they're kind of making it up now, it's more thinking about maybe there's a potential stressor and exploring that a bit more. And then thinking about different fabrics. So something that came out of the study that we spoke about was that fabrics such as wool and polyester and acrylic are far more aversive than cottons and softer fabrics. So having things like sweatshirts and polo t-shirts available as alternatives to shirts and ties and blazers for students when they're struggling with that can be a really helpful alternative. So my key message is to just be open and flexible and think about it in terms of supporting students' ability to focus, because we know on a neurological level their sensory systems are just being overwhelmed and bombarded all the time, and this will have an impact on their overall stress levels and their ability to concentrate.